Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let's move right on to the action items. To approve the FY25 budget changes for the board recommendations. Robbie, would you like to walk us through that?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. We have 3 action items before you today for your recommendation to move to the board for approval. And the first one is related to budget changes since our last meeting,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
our last board meeting since July the 18th. And I'll do a quick summary. The first is good news. At board discretion, the beginnings fund balance, which includes lapse, has decreased. It's decreased by about $2.6 million. And that's almost a 2% increase since the first of this fiscal year. The second change to revenue is $132,000 decrease in interest earnings, and that's largely due that we don't have as much fund balance to invest, so therefore the interest earnings has dropped just a little bit, but nonetheless we're still way ahead on budget there, which we'll talk about a little later in the presentation here. Expenditures, $25,000 for the Mental Health Foundation's annual fee of $25,000, which I just repeated, and administration cost for the upcoming competitive market survey. This will help address lagging wages of $117,000 for a total of expenses change of $142,000. Any questions there? Hearing none, I'll move forward. I want to do a quick overview of the budget. Hunter has that kindly demonstrated there on the board for us, or displayed on the board for us. Total revenues, $110 million, almost $111 million. If you include fund balance in that, you're $162 million. The child program, year to date, we're at $118 million, and that's for our children and family programs. The budget was $110. Spend to date, we're at $118 million. So that is largely due to the use of fund balance, which we are trying to decrease. This time of year, we should be roughly 83% spend for this time of year. And right now on our programs, we're at about almost 73% of that. So we're a little bit off. Lapse is included in that, obviously. And then for general government, JWB specifically, total expenditures there year to date is $15 million compared to a budget of $16 million. So we have a positive variance there of almost 10%. Be mindful that these expenses will lag about 30 days in that we're getting reimbursements in every day, and we'll have a better picture obviously at the end of August as we will at the end of September, which will be the end of our year. Total expenditures overall, we have budgeted $126 million amended budget, and year to date we're at about $133 million of that. So we're at roughly 82%. So in total expenditures, we're almost at the 83% that we wanted to be at. At the bottom of the page, Hunter, I wanted to just point out that we had talked some about the board designated reserves that JWB is required to keep on hand. And those are those 3 months that we've talked about. And you're going to see a policy change that we're going to review in just a minute that will change that at the bottom. As you can see, the heading at the bottom there is unassigned. For the reserve piece of that, the 1 month and the 2 month, that will revert to assigned. And then the remaining unassigned is truly the unassigned board balance of unassigned revenues that the board has purview over, and they can use it as they see fit. So just to point that out as we get into this presentation. Any questions there? All right, hearing none, moving forward. In your packet, there was a schedule for this body to review and recommend to the board, and the schedule is related to the Finance Committee meetings. This is in 2C of your packet materials, and the dates are before you there. I don't have those to display, but any questions regarding that? I don't recall that there was none, and that we have talked about that in the past. So I'm going to move forward.
Need a motion.
Okay, so I think we have to have two motions, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, I'm sorry, I'm moving forward with
Okay,
that motion.
that's
Trying to-
okay. That's fine.
I'm excited.
So if we move on, go back to A, which is the approve of the FY budget changes for board recommendations. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion's passed. Now moving on to B, which is the adoption of the FY '25 JWB Finance Committee meeting schedule. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I have a
Second.
motion. I have a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, now let's move on to the recommendations of the board approval for new board policies.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. We'll make that correction going forward, not to move as quick. Before you
Well, we
are,
would stop you. You can guarantee that.
It's easier to slow down than to make somebody go faster, so it's okay.
the policy changes before you are, the first one is fund balance. And that gets back to the assigned and unassigned, where we're going to assign the 3 months reserve subject to this body's approval and board approval. And the designation from the 3 months operating expenses fund balance to go from unassigned to assigned. The second policy change that we have is for types of contracts. And we've added a piece to this related to the RFA program. The awardees of non-operating capital projects requests for applications, the RFA, to enter into land use agreement. And there's been some discussion about that as we've talked through this over time. And we've got another amendment that Hunter's got displayed there. If you can blow that up just a little bit more, it'd be helpful. The land use agreement, it was a concept that's used by Pinellas County and for their community block grant development program. And what it does is, being that the board has approved for us to go up from $200,000 to $315,000 in capital projects for an agency and go from 2 to 3 projects, we felt like we needed to, out of an abundance of caution, put the world on notice that JWB is making a pretty substantial investment here. And right there, Hunter. And the investment would go along with, when they sign the amendment to their contract and the project is awarded, the use restriction obviously would come to the board for approval, as will the project. But it would also go and be a part of public records, just like a lien would be. And it would be effective, the use agreement would be effective, as long as the unamortized portion of that investment for JWB is out there. So an example is, if you had a 10-year roof that had a 10-year depreciable life on it, and they kept it for 5 years and then sold the building, well, there's 5 years that remains that needs to be amortized. So that would have to come back to the board. Repayment could be an option, as well as if the facility is going to be used for a lifetime cause, the board could consider that. Or we just might want to put a hold to say, we've got to be completely compensated for this unamortized portion before it moves forward.
The history is that within our program finance policies that we've used, and I can think of 3 or 4 times we've used over the last 5 years, require this repayment in exactly this way. They require the undepreciated amount to be paid back if either the JWB contract is no longer in place with that agency for that service in that building, or that the building is sold. You know, I know the St. Pete Free Clinic's family residence, for instance, JWB had provided, I'm not sure which, I think, you know, a roof, a bunch of air conditioning, things like that, but it was over $100,000. When that building was sold and they had those proceeds, the proceeds to repay us, the undepreciated amount, came back to us. And we've had a few other circumstances where that was true. This change isn't so much whether we require repayment or not, or even how much or what triggers a repayment, but rather that we would add a use restriction that would be essentially attached to just the property that was subject of our grant, not all their property, but just the property subject to their grant, so that if any of those things occurred, JWB's right for repayment would be secured and would be in the chain of title. And certainly if they sold it, they couldn't sell it without clearing that, that obligation.
The only concern I have is the wording specific enough because of the variables of how they do the depreciation and everything else, that we legally will be, Brian, you might know the answer to that, that's your department on that, but, it's just kind of arbitrary, so they could set their own depreciation schedule that depreciates it the first 3 years they got it, and you got, 7 more years that
We thought about that question, Bruce, a lot, and the way in which we intend to deal with that on a going forward basis is that as part of all the processes that will occur before it comes to you as a board, we will negotiate with that provider what the timeline should be for depreciation. We haven't had a problem with that before, mostly because all of our agencies, or all but all, are audited externally, and they look at depreciable lives at least within an area of reasonableness.
If I can ask, though, is there a recommendation as to what the wording might be better, Brian, or Mr. Bartlett, or do you have a thought?
Not really. I don't do those land use stuff, so it's kind of my backyard.
Brian?
Yeah, I was comfortable with the way it was worded, but I do think that is something that we need to be very mindful of on a case-by-case basis. When we review the LURAs, to make sure that we're all comfortable, with what that schedule is and what it says and whether it's realistic and reasonable or if it favors them or favors us. And obviously we want to be fair. But I don't know, I guess I would defer to Colleen on answering that on that, at least in terms of the current wording.
So this is our policy, and so the policy is, just like all policies, broad enough to encompass all the circumstances. We've had so many discussions and emails and Teams meetings on this. The county uses land use restrictions for the block grant funding, and they use their own, to Mr. Bartlett's point, they just use a schedule based on amount, strictly on amount. Ours will be, an agreed upon depreciation schedule, but we will obviously have to have a specific land use agreement that will be more specific than this language in our broad policy.
And it will state how many years.
Correct. It has to state the period of time and what the restriction is, and the restriction is the property must be being used for JWB funded programming, and that's your restriction. If you're not using it, whether you resign or you're terminated for whatever reason, that your funding comes to an end, you would have to refund the amount that has not been depreciated yet. So we will have the specifics in the actual land use agreement that is recorded. And so this is just the broad policy. The specific land use agreement required in response to the capital RFA will be attached as a document for them to look at ahead of time so they can decide if they're comfortable or not with it. I mean, they may say, no, we don't want to do that, and that's okay. Or they may come to us and say it's a 2-year schedule, and Robbie may look at it and be like, no, that's a 10-year schedule. We need to make sure it's 10 years. So there are variables, but those will all be hammered out on the front end so that we have the necessary specifics for it to be enforceable.
Do you think you could maybe do like a hypothetical draft for us before the board meeting, just to see what you would propose? Not that they would accept it, but just like a hypothetical, like this is what we would start out as a template?
We are ahead of you. We are already working on that
Good.
land use
Okay, that'd be
agreement.
great.
I'm almost done with the draft, and I'll send it to you when I finish it and before we even circulate that. Because don't forget, the RFA itself no longer comes to you before it's released with our new policies. So I'll send it to you.
Sure.
And we'll make certain that everybody agrees to it. I don't think, honestly, that since the specificity of the restriction is that you have to be using the property for JWB funded programming. I mean, there's just not really much to negotiate around those terms. It's really just the timing for the length of it.
And so, of course, that would be an exhibit to the RFA, so everybody who applies up front would know
Yes.
this is
Correct.
this is one of the things I'm getting myself into if I
Correct.
pursue these funds. Got it.
Now, the only negotiable thing would be the length, and I don't even know if negotiable, but to be determined as appropriate would be the depreciation schedule. And obviously, this is only if they're making capital improvements to property. If it's something that a land use restriction isn't appropriate for, they're not going to agree to it because it's going to be a special condition. Okay, you're recommending you for award with this special condition because you want a new roof, like the example Robbie gave.
Okay, thank you.
Robbie, any other changes to the policy?
Just one final, and that's regarding the advances. And at the bottom of that policy is the framework of how the RFA proceeds will be advanced. And if advance is required, and really this helps float maybe for an agency that doesn't have the cash flow from one month to another month expenses. So if, they had to pay for the equipment up front or had to pay for any of those type things to get the project going, that advance would be given to the agency. And then the next month, whatever their reimbursement was, it would pay back that advance. And it would be a rolling thing, very similar to a line of credit. At the end of the project, the advance would be completely paid back by their final reimbursement. So we would never exceed the approved amount of the project, but this just helps from month to month manage cash flow with the advance based on the criteria that we would base it on would be they're going to provide a draw statement to say, here are the draws that are anticipated for this project. The highest draw, monthly draw on that statement would be the cap of the advance that we would propose.
So this was initiated, as you can imagine, because we were expanding the opportunity from $200,000 to $350,000. That begs more projects that are building and improvement related. Ergo, the first discussion we had. But also maybe that some of the very agencies that most need the new roof, new air conditioner, whatever, may not have the cash flow for those kinds of projects to do it. So our former policy was that there were no advances for capital at all. We gave advances for operating to help them get from month to month since we reimburse in arrears. But we did not have that for this and have just had to say, you've got to find the money somewhere. When you start talking about monies that go as high as $350,000 over a period of time, and agencies that may otherwise be pretty small, we felt that it would just discourage and or eliminate those smaller agencies from even applying. This was a way we could protect ourselves by only advancing enough that they would need in their toughest month. And staying on top and recovering those amounts through reimbursements through the time period.
The only other question I have, and it's more like a practical question, but obviously, if one of the agencies is leasing the property, it's highly unlikely that the landlord is going to agree to a land use restriction.
Yep.
And I noticed that we put that in there that, if it's owned or leased, so that, in my mind, practically eliminates anybody who's leasing. But at the same time, have we ever or would we ever put out capital outlay to improve property that wasn't owned by an agency anyway? And the answer may be no. But I just don't know, is that a concern that we should have?
Yep, we have a whole section in the RFA relative to that. We certainly ask that question, is this owned or leased property? We have a few agencies. The one that comes to mind first is Bethel, lives in a church that is leased to them, maybe for almost nothing. And the church doesn't have the wherewithal to make the kinds of improvements that would be necessary. For other reasons, a couple of years ago, Bethel didn't get the capital, the capital that was in fact assigned to them. But we look at things like how long is the lease? In this, if it's something that relates to something that won't walk away, that's attached to real property, we would be asking the lessor to sign this agreement. There's obviously risk on the lessor's part. They could do everything just fine, and the agency could, close, mess up, not have a contract with JWB, and then they'd be sitting with that land use restriction on their property. And it would be the amount at that time of the undepreciated value. So it might not be the full value, but it's never going to get smaller either, because they're as of that date, they're not using it for kid services. That's really a landlord choice. We have another, I think, that's going to bubble up this year, where a church is willing to provide significant space to an organization who could run a quality early learning site. But the church doesn't have the money in order to bring all of those rooms up to even probably a reasonable level, much less it'll pass licensure board level. And, we will lay out, these are the options. And if the church is motivated to want to do it, and or if they feel like if the particular group isn't doing it, as of today, that we could find somebody else, because we want those things happening.
So Brian, the issue you raised is exactly what I raised to Beth and Robbie, that it's difficult to get a landlord to agree to a land use restriction. Why do they want to do that? And that may be an issue, that if somebody's asking for a capital improvement, but the landlord says no, that is something for you to consider when you're making your award. And maybe you say, we're willing to go ahead with it without the land use restriction, or we're not willing to go ahead with it with, that's in your discretion. So you can always make that distinction at the time of the award if you felt that it was something you wanted to do, even though the landlord's not going to give a land use restriction.
Yeah, I would say, although we haven't, we're not at the other end of the evaluation time, but my guess is Robbie and I would not recommend that for approval. However, you see in that spreadsheet you've always seen, now I'll have a few more columns, you're going to see what we did not recommend and why, and it is always the board's option to pick up one of those and say, no, we do want to fund that, either in lieu of other things or in addition.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. All right, let's move on to the monthly financial investment report for June 2024 and July 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is on 3A, and I'll do a quick, brief overview of the government-wide balance sheet. Just to give you some perspective, total assets compared to the prior year decreased about $700,000, and that's a culmination of outflows for the retirement system, as well as changes in cash, largely due to probably spending down of cash. Total liabilities increased by about $6.5 million, and this is largely due to the net pension liability, as well as the subscription-based information technology agreements, a new line item in financial statements, a new accounting for how you amortize software. And then total equity decreased by about $7.3 million, and that's largely a use of fund balance. And as you know, our budget last year anticipated spending down fund balance by about $24 million. So that will shore itself up as we go through over time. Any questions about that? Okay. The budget is displayed here. This is year-to-date as of July 31st that we've talked about. It's also in your packet, and I'll just do a real quick overview of it and take questions at the end. Property tax revenue year-to-date had an increase of about $7.5 million from the prior year, and that was largely due to the tax property assessment going up. So we get a windfall from that. Interest income has gone up some. Administrative expenses, $8.2 million compared to the $7.4 million last year. That's 82% of what JWB has in expenses is in administrative costs, particularly employee cost, compensation, and benefits. And then finally, the Children and Family Program reimbursements include $66 million, almost $67 million year-to-date, compared to almost $50 million in FY '23. So that's a real quick overview of the balance sheet. Any questions there?
Back to what we discussed yesterday, could you just give a better explanation on the revenue over and under
Sure can.
section? Because it shows something like a minus 99.3%,
Yeah, go down to the bottom there.
and it's kind of, it's the bottom, all the way to the bottom.
Absolutely. Hunter, if you'll go up a little bit if you can, the other way. Go down to, yeah, a little bit
All the way
further.
to the last line.
Yeah, at the last line there. What the chairman's talking about is the 99.3% at the bottom of that form. And that doesn't mean we have a 99% variance. And really that percentage doesn't give useful information relative to that line item. The budget on the far left, the $24,706,000 there, is the amended budget. And then the actuals are the $24,533,000. So we have a deficit in our budget using fund balance largely on the left. On the right side, the actual shows the 24. So if we use fund balance to pay back the 24,706, that leaves a final variance there, a positive variance of 24,553. That percentage should not be there. It's just not useful.
Yeah, I agree.
But it certainly doesn't indicate that we have a 99% variance in that line item.
I just wanted to make sure it's not confusing to anyone, because it's there, and if you took it off, I wouldn't have a problem with it, anybody else. The one other thing is that, and we have continued to discuss the fact of how much we've taken down, the amount of funds we've used to reduce what our fund balance is. And also, we've talked a bit about the, well, let's stay with the fund balance for now. What was the actual, I see the number, what's the percentage of actual reduction?
1.8%.
1.8%.
Yeah, but almost $3 million. So give you some perspective of that.
Is that the lapse difference, or is that something else?
That's the spend down in the unassigned. Yeah.
Okay, and that's my second question. How much has lapsed decreased by?
I don't have that figure with me. Diana, do you have it? Off the top of your head?
Say last fiscal year.
Yeah.
Fiscal year '23, and then year-to-date projection, the most recent year-to-date projection. Yeah,
Okay.
as a percentage as well.
Yeah, as a percentage we're looking for, because the board has continued to discuss the concern about lapse. And so, we see that there is a reduction there somewhere, but we're not, I'm not clear to me as how much has been and how much impact that's made yet.
It's going in the right direction.
Oh, no question.
So while she's looking at that, any further questions on the year-to-date budget? If not, let's move forward to the investment report there. And I like to use the center there where it shows the annual budget. I think that gives a good summary snapshot of where we are year-to-date. We budgeted about $2.5 million. Year-to-date, we're about $4.1 million in interest earnings. So we're about 62% over our budget, or almost $1.6 million. So, it's hard to predict what the market will do.
Didn't have as many reductions this year as we guessed.
Right. So to give you some perspective, Hunter, if you'll go to the bottom there, last year we had an average return rate of almost 4%. This year, year-to-date, we're about 4.8%. So it's moving all in the right direction for sure. Any questions about that? Hearing none, Diana's still looking there.
It's okay. Whenever.
Whenever you get it, that'll be fine. If there's any other questions or none on any questions, let's move on to the executive report, please.
Yeah, do this. We'll give Diana a little time to find that. First, it's been a very full summer for the Juvenile Welfare Board, so a sense that we've been lollygagging around and hanging out with our children at Disney World. Well, actually, that's harder than working, so I would rather work. But all kinds of one-time things or things for kids in the summer that are just perfect. And we've been able in these to engage legacy board members, elected officials, some other civic leaders, and many of you, as well as our staff, to make these things happen. And in each one of them, there's at least one, maybe two people who absolutely make the magic happen, who hold the reins, so to speak. So the first thing I wanted to mention is not so much an activity, although what you're seeing here is summer food for families. And I've talked about it before at the board table, in conjunction with the St. Petersburg Free Clinic. They provided the food, and we, in one case, provided a place. And we were twice in North County, twice in South County, twice in Mid-County. The Mid-County location, they asked to use JWB's parking lot. So we rallied around, and we had an opportunity not only to deliver food to families who needed it, but I think for all of us, we got to see who these folks are, that they could easily be the next person you run into in a store, and you might not know that they're struggling and don't know how they're going to put food on the table that night. In addition, it became an opportunity for us to talk about food insecurity and children on the media. So Jennifer Dull and April made sure I did 6 different interviews that day talking about hunger overall and why it mattered, as well as what was going on that day to help kids. So it was a great opportunity to lift up that need. Summer's a time of, oh, there we go, Judge Moore. A child, let me get close to her. Shirley Justice. So you see familiar faces. Mike McCurrick worked tirelessly. Joanne, and Lynn Geist is there, who for years ran all of the operations for food at the school board, a great collaborative partner through all those years. She's retired, but she came out on a very hot, humid morning to help schlep groceries, because that's just who she is. So we got Laura Hine and Jim Milliken, lots of good folks. Well, I want to step back from what was really a feel-good and a tangible way in which we could make a difference, and note and look a little bit at public policy and where we are in the state of Florida. Summer is a time of food and hunger crisis for children, because they don't have steadily what is generally not only a lunch but often a breakfast at school. In Pinellas County, due to funds raised and food provided by the private nonprofit sector, every elementary school student in Pinellas County who is identified as food insecure and likely not to have food in their home over the weekend receives a supply of weekend food that is nutritious, child-friendly, and requires no preparation. So no matter what else is going on in that household, that child can eat. They go under names of Pack-A-Sack or Pack-A-Snack, and organizations like the Beth Dillinger Foundation, operating as Nourish to Flourish, the St. Pete Free Clinic, and many others make this a reality. And I really want to give JWB credit for breaking down some of the silos that allowed these voluntary organizations to do these things through the school year. So while school's in session, we got a lot going on. In the summer, there's no place to distribute those weekend meals. Weekend food's no longer available. In Pinellas, this is true for the 4 weeks there is food for the 4 weeks of summer bridge, which the county schools run. Those are 4-day weeks, Monday through Thursday. JWB, you might not know, but JWB programs the 5th day, or contracts with somebody to program the 5th day, so that parents have the care they need for a 5-day week. Not that many kids would not be able to go to summer bridge if we didn't step in and fill that gap. So in the summer, the school meals aren't available, and in Pinellas, this is true except for those 4 weeks of summer bridge. During COVID, the federal government provided extra SNAP, sometimes called EBT, SNAP benefit funding for families with children to help close the hunger gap. That program provided for each child $120 one time for the summer, or $40 a month, in grocery assistance. And that happened when school was out, to supplement summer meal programs that did exist. For summer 2024 and 25, these additional, post-COVID, these additional federal dollars must be applied for by the state, and the federal government provides the additional funding, and the state picks up half of the administrative costs. So in numbers, in fiscal year 24, that would have been $255 million from the feds, and the share of the administrative costs the state of Florida would have had to have kicked in was $12 million. So for $12 million, we could have gotten $255 million of food. You can probably tell where I'm headed, because I'm saying it would have, or it were. The application to participate in the 2024 additional money for kids' food was not applied for by the state of Florida, by the governor. And the deadline just passed to apply for next year, for fiscal year 25, and the state of Florida did not sign up, did not apply to do that. So, it's a loss of something like $500 million of food that would go to our kids and our families. And we do a lot of work to try to reduce hunger, and it's a shame to see that opportunity go by. So speaking of JWB-led activities, we've already kind of talked about our hunger initiatives, and we saw about 2,500 kids or families driving through those 6 drive-throughs I already talked about. Very impactful. Families receive not only the things you might think about in a food bank, like cans of this or that, but they receive fresh milk, fresh eggs, meat, chicken, lots of vegetables and fruit. And it was enough that it was a little backbreaking, wasn't it?
A little bit, but
Yeah.
it was worthwhile seeing all the, like you said, people that you probably wouldn't have expected to have seen that are struggling through this process.
Yeah. So once again, the key to that success was amazing people, staff, board members, local VIPs, elected officials, community leaders. Everybody who volunteered, I think, got something out of it, was reminded that they were probably going home to a full refrigerator and a full pantry and an easy way to fix the next meal, and that was just not the case for a significant number of people. We also had, and we've talked about it a few times, I think, but the book bus really kicked into gear when the book bus hit the road for the 7th year. This year, we visited 76 sites all around Pinellas County. We welcomed 4,700 kids aboard the book bus and distributed 9,470 books. Go back one. You may hope you recognize Eileen Sullivan and Mayor and Judge Gross over here on the right. So your forebears on this board and others were well represented, and I think for each of them, so much of the work we do is funding, or it's in contracts, or and you can't touch it and feel it. This was a very good opportunity to touch and feel one of the ways in which we enhance summer learning and reading and literacy. Certainly not the only one. And I think I mentioned before, at each of these sites, the Mayan coordinator was there to sign kids up and show them how to do it. Mayan is a very robust library, if you will, of online books designed for children. And JWB pays for a license for all of Pinellas County so that every child in Pinellas County can have access to all of these books. And both ways are good. Kids love to pick out a physical book, and they got to do that, and they enjoyed that as well. Let's see, back to school events. So here you've got many of our folks and some of our community council members were also helpful. We're trying to spread all of our information in our campaigns wherever it makes sense and wherever it's possible. So we were there to help kids get ready and go back to school. And I know this team filled in and worked and helped the event in whatever way was necessary. You see, yeah, right in the middle there. And special thanks to the community engagement team and the community council members for representing JWB at 8 back-to-back school events across the county. And they reached more than 3,000 kids. So it was, as they say, a target-rich environment in which to talk about turbo babies, talk about kindergarten counts, to make a difference where, maybe the kid and parent just came because they knew they'd get a backpack full of items. But if these are also there are opportunities to spread the word. Some upcoming events include the Focus faith-based event, Planning for Mental, Financial, and Spiritual Wellness in 2024. And this event is on Thursday, August 29th from 9 to 12 at the Center for Health Equity in St. Pete. And by way of background, Focus connects faith-based partners with social service agencies to make connections, share resources, build capacity, and support our county's children and their families. Turbo Babies racetrack read-along events are going to be Saturday, September 7th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at 3 public libraries: St. Pete West Community Library in South County, Largo Public Library in Mid-County, and Tarpon Springs Public Library in North County. These storytime events are free to families of babies 0 to 3. Pit crew bags, storybooks, and more will be given out to the parents and the families in attendance there. So these books are being held in conjunction with National Read a Book Day, which is September 6th. So everybody report back what book they read on September 6th. I use an app called Blink or Blinkist. You can, for a nonfiction book, it works. You can ask for that book and it'll give it to you in 5 easy lessons. It's the digital type of Cliff Notes. But and then we have the Art Club Community Pride at Gateway Early Learning Center. The ribbon cutting will be Friday, September 13th from 9 to 11. Please come if you can. And our 2024 Out of School Time Conference is on Saturday, September 24th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Ruth Eckerd Hall. Please reach out to Olivia, our clerk of board, if you're interested in doing any of those things or you just want to be reminded of what those were. So it's been a busy time, but a very good and promising time this summer. Thanks.
Thanks for the update, Beth. There was a lot going on. There's no question about that. Anything on the open agenda? Do we have any public? I don't think we do.
I did have that.
Oh, you
answer
do?
yeah.
Excellent.
So last year, fiscal year '23, our lapse was 19.5%. We had, our target for this year was 15%, and so far, we're projecting to come in under at 14%. Our target for next year is 13%, so we're,
So we're in a roughly 5% reduction so far.
and then we're targeting 15 for this year, and so far, we're thinking we're gonna come in at 14, and our target for next year is 13.
The diciest element we had in this year's budget, or the softest
Right.
projection.
Thanks for the update. I think that's extremely important, as, again, the board has continued to ask about that, and I think we're seeing progress. Great. Any other comments, questions, or any other items needing to be brought to the board? Hearing none, I adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Colin.